Hey guys, Ricky Widmer here from Most Valuable Podcast. You're about to listen to a little bit of our primetime podcast that we recorded this week. Make sure to go to Blog Talk Radio /Most Valuable Podcast for our full-length podcast that you can go ahead and download. I hope you enjoy it. I know me and Brandon did recording it. But Brandon, we got to move on into our last topic. And if you are on Blog Talk Radio, everything is staying the same, guys. It's a cool podcast. If you're on YouTube, you're like, whoa, guys, you're wearing different shit now. You got different clothes on. What happened? We're recording this a day later than we recorded the first two segments. On YouTube, we look different. I'm finally wearing different colored shorts. I got my black shorts on today. But Brandon, we're going to end the podcast talking about Michael Porter Jr. currently playing in the McDonald's All-American game as we are recording this segment. He was going to go to Washington. Washington fires their head coach. He decommits. And after Washington said, fine, you can leave, we're releasing your letter of intent, where's he going? Right back home to Missouri to follow his dad, because his dad got hired as an assistant coach. And guess who followed him? Michael Porter Jr. So we're going to start with Missouri before we move over to the SEC. And I got to ask you this. What does it mean for the Tigers? What does this mean for Mizzou?
Well, I think it might mean that they might win 3 games in the conference this year. For Missouri, I think they have a little ways to go. I personally think they have a ways to go. 2-16 in conference this year, 8-24 overall. I mean, it was bad. It was very bad. So I think that this team needs to get better. But I think with Michael Porter Jr., they're going to do that. And I think that they're getting very lucky by being able to get him coming over. But it's not just one guy. One guy is not going to do it. One guy is not going to do it after you win 2 games in conference. I think that Mizzou has a whole lot to deal with. And it's going to be really interesting how it plays out. But again, like I said, Michael Porter Jr. is going to be a huge addition. But he can't be all. He can't be the only thing that they bring in.
Well, and the thing that I like how everyone's talking about, they're like, oh, well, this could make Missouri a viable team in the SEC. They can find and bring in other. I look at it as garbage piece players.
How does it make them a viable? I want to know. What are people saying? How does that make them a viable team? From 2-16 to 8-24, you do not become a viable team in 1 year.
And this is where I'm getting at. I was going to get to that, Brandon, is everyone right now is looking at this of basketball is a game where, one good player and you're a better team just with that one good player. You're better. But the thing I'm going to look at is this is a player who has the talent to be a number 1 pick in the NBA draft. However, I want to look at something. Last year's number 1 pick, potentially right now, if we look at Sean Anderson's mock draft, this year's number 1 pick, and then if we put Porter right now as the early, way too early favorite for next year's number 1 pick, you want to know what all 3 of those would have in common, Brandon? None of them would make the tournament. Ben Simmons didn't make the tournament. Markelle Fultz didn't make the tournament. And then Michael Porter Jr., if Mizzou, I don't think he can help them make the tournament alone. But if they didn't make the tournament, there would be 3 in a row number 1s that have not made the tournament.
And I want to say really quickly, and I don't want to make this a rant on Ben Simmons. Ben Simmons, good player, didn't make his team that much better. I mean, he did, but he didn't at the same time. Were they a tournament team? No, not at all. But at the same time, too, it's like one guy clearly does not make a team. LSU was not a tournament team. Warrens didn't go anywhere near the tournament. They were not that good. The only reason they were anywhere near that good was because of Ben Simmons when he wanted to play, when he wanted to show up to the games, when he wanted to not take plays off. Yeah, just my opinion. But I think that Michael Porter Jr. will make the team better, certainly. But you've got to have a core. You've got to have a core. Take a look at the NBA. Let's take a look at the NBA for a very quick second. LeBron James this year. LeBron James did not. Actually, I don't want to look at this year. I want to look at when he was in Miami. LeBron James did not win it all on his own. He had Chris Bosh. He had Dwayne Wade. If they have just LeBron James, man, they're a really, really good team. They're probably they could definitely go to the finals. They're going to win it just with LeBron James? Most likely not.
No, they didn't win it that first year.
Most likely not. You need to have a core around you. That only makes sense. You can go so far with a really good player. I mean, look at all sports. The White Sox could only go so far with Chris Sale. The Cubs could go so far with some of the good guys they had here and there for a number of years. You need a core. The Cubs had a core this past season, these past 2 years. That's why they won. You need to have a core around you.
Well,
one guy does not do it.
Look at just this year in the Final Four. The Zags, complete team. Oregon, a complete team. UNC, a complete team. South Carolina, a complete team. If we look at the other teams that were very well this year in the tournament, Duke had more than just one player. You have Arizona, had more than just one player. Look at Kansas, had more than just one player. Louisville had more than just one player. The teams that had, to me, just one player, where's Washington? Bottom of the Pac-12, nowhere near the tournament. Doesn't matter. Markelle Fultz will probably be a number 1 or a number 2 pick in the NBA draft. And for Missouri, with me, the big thing is what are you going to bring in? Because we're late in the process. And right now, Missouri to me is in a very kind of difficult spot because they bring in a coach, Coach Martin from Cal, and he's got a lot to do right now. Basically, let's be honest, the only reason they got Michael Porter Jr. was because they gave Dad money. They said, you know what, we're going to pay Daddy some money to bring him on, make you a high-paid assistant, because what we know, we're not just paying for you, we're basically paying for your son. We're paying you to have your son come play for us because we need him. Missouri, like you said, I know you were saying it jokingly when you said, well, they might win 3 more conference games this season, but they will win some more games just by having Michael Porter Jr. on the roster. It's just a fact. When you add a player as dynamic as he can be to a team, you're going to win some more games than you did the year before. However, what are the pieces around him going to do? Not just that, for Missouri, with how competitive they're going to be, the one thing I'm thinking coming into next season, how good is the SEC going to be next year in college basketball? This is a conference where it's usually been a laughingstock. Okay, Florida, Kentucky. Those are the only 2 teams we're thinking about that could go anywhere. Maybe Tennessee a couple years when they had Bruce Pearl on the sideline. But this year, you have Kentucky, really good team. Florida, really good team. Arkansas was a really good team. Almost beat the number 1 seeded Tar Heels in their region of the bracket. South Carolina, they're in the Final Four. Florida, I forgot to mention, they were an Elite 8 team this year, along with Kentucky. Then you have teams like Vanderbilt, who put up a fight this year, Alabama, who is looking better and better with Avery Johnson on the sideline as their coach. They almost knocked off the Kentucky Wildcats in their conference tournament. This is a conference that is becoming more and more competitive. And I don't think that Michael Porter Jr. is the guy to bring you from 2-16, 8-24 overall to, I'll even go where South Carolina was this year. You're not going to be 10-6 with 26-10. I might see, let's say they do win those 5 games that you said. You're right where Auburn is, 7-11, and then depending on non-conference, let's say you're the same, 18-14. Not good enough to make the tournament. Definitely not good enough to make the tournament. But the thing that was going to be interesting is what kind of a player Michael Porter Jr. is, because although we both agree it doesn't take just one player to bring a team somewhere, can he be that leader that both me and you last year knocked Ben Simmons for it? Great talent, don't think he can lead a team. Same thing I'm having this year. Markelle Fultz, great talent, but I'm going to pick Lonzo Ball because he's a great talent and a great leader on top of it. I just don't think that Fultz is a leader compared to Ball. Is Porter going to be that leader on top of a great player?
Can I ask you a question really
Go
quickly? It really has nothing to do with Michael Porter, but how do you see Lonzo Ball as being a better leader? What has he done that shows that he's a better leader?
The thing is, I look at him and he's said it in interviews, and I get it in his attitude. It doesn't matter how much he's scoring. It does not matter if he's the leading scorer, if TJ Leaf is the leading scorer, if Alfred Son is the leading scorer, as long as the team wins the game. Like, he was asked on the Herd, well, what do you think of, you scored 11 points here, 8 points here, 5 points here. That's off, but you get it. It's less and less each time. Teams figured you out. He said, we got the win. As long as we get the win, it doesn't matter who's scoring. And with Michael Porter Jr., kind of to relate that over back to him, is that the kind of player he's going to be at Mizzou? Is it going to be a sense of, well, fuck it, I'm here, we're not going anywhere, I'm just going to try to put the team on my back and inflate my own stats because I'm going to be gone after a year? Or is it going to be something where it's, hey, you know what? This team, I can be the leader of it, and it doesn't matter if I have the most points. If I have a player that's open in the corner, I'm going to pass to that guy. If this guy has the hot hand and I'm cold that night, am I going to go to him a little bit more than trying to shoot myself out of a funk because I'm the quote-unquote number one player on this team? That, to me, is going to be the question that we need to answer with Michael Porter Jr. coming out of high school before we can even speculate where Missouri is going to be in this SEC, because it's one of those things, too, where I read an article today where I want to say it was from kansascity.com or the Kansas City newspaper, and they said that don't expect Michael Porter Jr. to necessarily be a one and done. And I was like, well, I'm going to expect him to be a one and done. Number one coming out of high school usually means number one going into the draft. And when that cha-ching starts talking, players leave for it every time. Players leave for the money every single time, especially when you have that number one next to your name in mock drafts. But next year at Missouri, what kind of player are we going to get from Michael Porter Jr. leader-wise? Is he going to be the leader of this team, or is he just going to be, hey, you know what? I'm going to try to will this team to middle of the pack in the SEC and inflate my own stats?
I think that with him, and he's coming in, he's definitely got size, and he's got a good outside shot. So he's going to be able to score them some points. And I think that that's what is going to make him, I think that that's one of the things that's making him so attractive for teams, and why Mizzou is got to be very happy to have him. So you like you said, you kind of have to think you worry about him possibly a one and done. But what else? What can you do as an institution to make sure that he's not a one and done? What can you do as Mizzou? Because how I see it is, okay, you're LSU. Going back to Ben Simmons, you're LSU. Ben Simmons is there for 1 year. What attracts you more than 1 year to LSU? Because your program isn't going anywhere. He was gone after this past year. It didn't go anywhere. How as Mizzou, how are you going to attract a player, a solid player, one of the best players possibly coming out into college? How do you attract him to stay?
With me, the thing that I look at is I think it's all on Coach Martin. And the reason why I say that is look what happened with Washington when they fired their head coach. Michael Porter Jr. was really connected to the head coach. As soon as he was fired, he even said in an interview, he kind of felt like, whoa, I can't believe, like, he's like, I thought they'd give him one more year so that it's like, okay, look what we can start with me here. Like, give him one more chance to see there are bigger things on the horizon. And if Mizzou wants him to stay more than 1 year, it starts with Coach Martin. This is the culture I am trying to build right from day one here at Mizzou. And number two, playing to the hometown kid factor. This is your team. This is your state. How not, I don't want to say like, oh, how cool it is, because that kind of undermines it, but the sense of how much of a legend would you be if you won a national championship for your team? The team that is your hometown team. The team that you put on Twitter when you were coming here. It's a graphic of Michael Porter Jr. and it says, "I'm coming home." That's LeBron-esque. How legendary would that be for you to win a national title for your team? That's what I would play into if I'm making the pitch. Another thing that I would look at is I'm looking back at the NBA drafts recently because I really got thinking what Sean said. And it's one of those things where if Fultz goes this year and then let's say Missouri doesn't make the tournament and Porter goes after 1 year, how many teams didn't make the tournament yet their player is still number one? And I look at everyone before that. Karl Anthony Towns made the tournament. Wiggins made the tournament. Bennett made the tournament. I'm going back. Anthony Davis made the tournament, won the national title. 2011, Kyrie Irving made the tournament. There's a thing about those guys. I look at those guys and I go, those guys are better NBA pros than I know Ben Simmons, it's only his first year. We haven't seen him play because of a foot injury, but I'm not as high on Ben Simmons as most people. Great talent, but I think that it's one of those things where it's not going to be as legendary as everyone thinks he's going to be. And I would say to Michael Porter, I go, we got to make the tournament. You got to make the tournament to help your draft stock and kind of feed into that. Now, would that work? It all depends on Michael Porter Jr. and his personality. Because if he's going to be a guy that when the big lights start shining and the cha-ching, cha-ching, the registers keep playing and the money goes to the eye, there's no keeping him. But if he's a guy that's like, you know what, I can come back another year, then that's how you keep him. You play to the hometown strings. You play to the look at what we're building here. You play to that relationship between coach and player. And the one thing I look at Coach Martin, and he is nothing like Coach Calipari. And I don't say that like, oh, you know what, Coach Calipari's been to this many Final Fours and this many national tournaments. I look at it the fact of Coach Cal is what he is. He's a great coach, but when he sits down in a recruiting table, he usually tells the player, my goal is to get you to the NBA. That's what it is. How many times do we talk about how many Kentucky players go in the first round? How many one and dones do we see from Kentucky? That's just what Coach Cal is. And there's nothing wrong with that. But Coach Martin is not that. And he needs to really play at that hometown and really play it. We're trying to build something special here, and you can be at the center of it for 2 to 3 years to come. So that's kind of my long answer to answer your question of how do they get them to stay for 1 year? That's how they do it.
And I'm interested to see how they're going to use this, because I think that ultimately at the end of the day, that's what they have to do. Because a guy like this, you can't, and really with a program like Mizzou, with how bad they are and how poor they've done recently, you don't want to have a one and done. Can't really afford it. You want to have a guy who comes in who's going to be good, who's going to stay for at least 3 years. I mean, that's what you want to see. You can build a program around that. Can't build a program around one and doners. Well,
unless you're Coach Cal,
you can if you're Coach Cal. Yeah. But also looking at Kentucky now, they didn't win. They got to Elite Eight. It's not winning. They've got one and doners on that team, and I think that you want to be able to build it around guys who are going to stay for the long haul. That's what I think is really important. And if you don't, then what are you left with? A lot of guys who had good talent and your team did good. Who cares? Who cares? My team did good. They did well. We competed. Who gives a crap? If you didn't win, if you didn't successfully get to the tournament, make a run, does it matter? Does it matter if you're the best player in the country? Does it matter? The guys were good. If they're one and doneers, if they don't stay for a long haul, doesn't matter.
And the one thing I'm looking at is I was watching today what you were saying kind of sparked something in my mind. I was watching some of the All-American game today while I was eating dinner before I came to the podcast tonight. And the one player that they had on for to kind of sit there was Richard Jefferson. The Cavs are in town. He's going ahead and saying, you know what, I'll be on the sideline for ESPN. They interviewed him, and he was kind of talking about his Final Four team that I want to say was the 2001 Arizona Wildcats was that Final Four team that he was talking about. And he was kind of naming all of the players that were on that roster. And I'm trying to pull it up right now where he said, yeah, this is it. So he said, you look at that roster that we had, that was his junior year. He said, you look at it, we had, Gilbert Arenas on that team, Luke Walton on that team, Michael Wright on that team. He said, we had some good NBA pros on that team. Let's be honest. Probably the big three of that would be Arenas, Walton, and then Richard Jefferson. Probably the ones that people know the most. But they had guys like John Ash was on that team, Lamont Frazier on that team, LaRon Woods on that team. And I look at it and I go, yeah, Gilbert Arenas and Luke Walton were sophomores that year. Richard Jefferson was a junior that year. And he even mentioned, he said, the thing that helped me the most when I got to the pros was having that experience, that Final Four experience as a junior. And he kind of talked a little about that. And the moral of the story that I got from RJ was basically you're saying staying in college and going to my junior year helped me out in the long run as a pro. Because, of course, every rookie, when you come in, you hear the stories about how, oh, this veteran, my rookie year, really helped me out. Kind of took me under their wing. You're always going to get that. Always need a veteran to kind of take you under the wing, show you what to do, show you what's right, show you what's wrong, because it's a big world out there. And when you're coming out of college, you don't really know what to expect. But to say I kind of like having that experience helped me spoke a lot to me. And that's something with Michael Porter Jr. I can relate it to, because one and done in Mizzou probably won't do you much. Will not do you much at all. It's basically at that point, I'm only playing here because I couldn't be like Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, or Kevin Garnett, meaning I couldn't come right out of high school. That's what you'd be saying. And I don't want this conversation to turn into, oh, well, Michael Porter should stay at Mizzou. It's really his choice at the end of it. But I just find it funny that a pro, while he's playing in that All-American McDonald's or McDonald's All-American game, mentioned that, staying there. And that's something that maybe could benefit Porter Jr. by staying there with Coach Martin, with his dad on that coaching sideline, developing. I'm not saying he has to stay all 4 years, but maybe he can help build Mizzou then into a program. Because like we look at Villanova last year, they had Archie Diacono, who it's one of those, yeah, he wasn't the number one player coming out of high school, but he was still there. How many guys have we seen on big programs like Ohio State, I think of, big juniors and seniors? Steph Curry. I know, yet again, the guys I'm mentioning aren't number one players coming out of high school, but there could be something to staying because it's Missouri and not a Kentucky, not a Kansas, not a, I don't want to say North Carolina, but not a Duke. It's not one of those top echelon Power 5 programs.
It's not. And I think that when you talk about what you just mentioned, I think that you have to, put aside the school part and look strictly at basketball. And you can get better. I mean, don't ever think that honestly, think that you're the best. That's great. But there's always someone better, isn't there? Right? I mean, right? I mean, even that's what I feel like we've always been told. You know what? Don't ever settle, because there's going to be someone better who comes along and does more or does it better or something like that. It happens, and it can happen if you're not working hard all the time. And I think that's where it's kind of like, stay in college a little bit longer, perfect everything that you possibly can, go into the NBA, the possibly best player that you can coming out of college. Buddy Hield stayed in college, fixed his whole shot.
He was shooting with the wrong hand.
Now, is everyone going to be like Buddy Hield? No. But the story can be, you stayed in college, you became a better player, you developed a little bit more, and you're going to be better than the one and doneer who came out, is trying to develop now in the NBA and is not having as much success as you are because you stayed, and you're coming out still young, planning to learn, planning to develop, but you're not as raw of a talent as he is.
I might have a little bit of an example based off of what you said, where you're like, you might not be as... Just listen. So, okay, 2013, you talked about the upperclassmen. The first guy that came into my head, Victor Oladipo at Indiana.
Sure.
Junior. Who went right before him in the draft? Biggest bust of recent years, Anthony Bennett, was only a freshman. Who went right after him? A sophomore in Otto Porter. Another sophomore in Cody Zeller. But if I look at just the freshmen from that, I'll look at the top 15. The freshmen that came out in that top 15, Anthony Bennett, Nerlens Noel, and then you have Steven Adams and Shabazz Muhammad. Those are the guys who were freshmen who got drafted in the top 15. Anthony Bennett, bust. Nerlens Noel got drafted by the Sixers. We're talking, like, all this year we've been talking about they're going to trade him. Eventually he finds a home, and now he's kind of trying to find things in Dallas, but never really had anything going in Philadelphia. Didn't really show that he had anything going. Also, he had injury problems as well. Then you look at Steven Adams, where really didn't do anything special until last year. Last year in the playoffs was the first time you really heard Steven Adams' name. And that was 3 years down the line. This last year would have been his senior year in college. Where'd Steven Adams go? Pittsburgh. Would have been his senior year at Pittsburgh if he would have stayed. But you look at a guy like Victor Oladipo. Did he do anything special in Orlando? No, but he was a viable starter. A viable starter. What happens? After a little bit in the NBA, also 3 years, a team like Oklahoma City looks at him and goes, we're going to trade for him. Now, an older player is looked at as a piece to this Oklahoma City team that lost something in Kevin Durant. So I look at that. I go, you know what? If you come out as a freshman and can go to the pros, great, go to it. It's like Richard Jefferson said. He said, I am all for, if you can come out of high school and play in the NBA, more power to you. But that's not everybody. Everybody, he's like, back in the day, it used to be kids went to college just to play. Like you saw more junior, senior, sophomores. He's like, back in my day. He said, if we just take away the one and done, kids will go to college, and the ones that want to be there will be there, and they'll stay through their junior year. And we won't see as many one and dones because I'll try to go to the NBA. Well, in Michael Porter Jr.'s case, I may try to make the case of, let's try to do something like Victor Oladipo at Indiana. And I use the big, like, I can't help but think of the Big Ten in my head. Because, Brandon, you tell me, how many one and dones can you name off the top of your head from the Big Ten?
Zero.
Look at Michigan this year. Rockman, Walton, Wagner, all upperclassmen. I think Wagner was the only freshman, but Walton and Rockman, even, I'm missing his name, Irving, upperclassmen. Look at Illinois when they went to the national championship. Upperclassmen. The Hoosiers with Victor Oladipo, Yogi Ferrell playing through his senior season. Ohio State, all the great players that they had, upperclassmen.
Michigan State.
Michigan State, too. Draymond Green wasn't a one and done. I think that Michael Porter Jr. will be an interesting case because he is going to be the one that I think kind of, if he stays, might change the landscape in college basketball of, wait, you mean if I'm the number one recruit coming out of high school, I don't have to go to the NBA? It's not just I go to a team for 1 year and I go to the NBA. That's what's going to be important. But the one thing I want to switch into, because we are kind of getting long on this segment, is I want to end this with wrapping up. What does Michael Porter Jr. coming to Mizzou do for the SEC? Because I've mentioned Wildcats are good, Gators are good, Gamecocks are good. We've got Alabama coming up. Vanderbilt's a viable team. What do you think this does for the SEC? Does this make the SEC a tougher conference because what we've seen? Or does this just mean the bottom of the conference got a little bit tougher, but it's not going to change much?
I think that for now, it remains to be seen. But I would like to think that it means, okay, now even the bottom doesn't want to be on the bottom anymore. They want to make a run. They want to try and be competitive. And I think if they're able to do that, then SEC basketball may start to make a little bit more of a name for itself. This year was huge for SEC basketball. Kentucky in the tournament, Florida, South Carolina, Arkansas, and all those teams did pretty well. Mm-hmm. Pretty darn well.
And you want to know a big piece of news that even adds in more fire to the conference? Robert Williams, a guy who everyone's mocking him around end of the lottery, 15, 16, maybe even 14, has come out and said, I'm coming back to Texas A&M for my sophomore season. So it's another guy saying, I am going to forego the NBA, come back for a sophomore season, and make Texas A&M, throw them into the pot now because they have him coming back.
I think that what it does overall is it forces everyone else to be more competitive. You know, a team like let's just say a Florida can't look at Mizzou and say, automatic win. Mm-hmm. You hope that that's what it's like because you want every team, every game to be competitive. It only makes you better as a squad. So I'm hoping that that's what it does for SEC basketball, is it makes it overall more competitive from the top to the middle to the bottom.
The thing that I think of is I'm going to use a comparison for what the SEC is on, what they are on their way to being. And this was a couple years ago, but when I used to write for Fansided's Illini website, writingillini.com, I used to not only watch the Illinois games, but I would watch all, like, Big Ten Network would be on my TV just left there more than ESPN. Why? Because it didn't matter who was playing, the top dogs or the bottom dogs. Every game was entertaining. Every game was entertaining. Were there a couple blowouts? Of course, you're always going to get blowouts in a season. But if it was a game like, I'll throw out Rutgers and, well, Nebraska used to be good then before they kind of fell off for this year. But if it was like, I don't know, I'll even look at the standings from 2 years ago to give you an example. If it was Rutgers, Penn State, I was still watching that game. Penn State, DJ Newbill could give you a run for your money. Every single game to me was competitive. That's what the SEC could be. I'm excited for next season to see what Alabama becomes. I'm excited to see Texas A&M with Robert Williams, what they can be with him coming back. Michael Porter Williams coming to this Missouri team. And for me with Missouri, I'm a little bit excited in general because now it means that one of the games that I enjoy each and every year might have some meaning again. And that's the bragging rights game. Illinois, Missouri. 2 new head coaches. Michael Porter Jr. coming to Missouri. This might have the meaning that it had 2 or 3 years ago when there was a game-winning shot. I want to say it was Brandon Paul that hit it. No, it might have been Rayvonte Rice. It was that year, though, where game-winning shot, Illinois wins it. Instead of like this year where it's like, oh, Illinois won the bragging rights game. Woo, we won. Even that little game for me is bringing back excitement. And for me, that's all I ask for. I don't ask that Mizzou jumps all the way to the top 5. Just make games competitive again. Make games, no matter who it is in that conference, competitive again, because the one thing that I think we've talked about for enough over the past few years is when it comes to college basketball, oh, there's ACC, there's Big 10, there's Big 12, there's Pac-12, oh, and then there's the SEC. Oh, by the way, oh, there's Kentucky over here. Oh, there's Florida over here. Whoever out of Florida and Kentucky, whoever's at the top, oh, they're over here waiting. It's not going to be like that. Kentucky and Florida might be 1-2, but it's not just a 2-team conference anymore. And that's what I'm excited for the SEC. So I know we went a while on this one. This one's probably as long as our Final Four discussion. But Brandon, any final thoughts on either Missouri, Michael Porter Jr., the SEC, anything?
I'm good.
Well, and this is where we are going to wrap up the show. This week, we will not have a Swanee's final thoughts. Swanee, under the weather this week. He's taking the week off. He'll be back with his final thoughts next week for you guys. I want to thank you guys for either listening to this podcast on Blog Talk Radio, iTunes, or Stitcher, or watching us here on our YouTube channel. If you like what you see, go hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. If you loved what you see, check out patreon.com/Most Valuable Podcast. Just a way for you to support the channel a little bit more than hitting that like button and hitting that subscribe button. But I want to thank you guys for giving us a time of your day, your afternoon, your evening. But as always, have a good day, everybody. Well, thank you guys for checking out this video from the Primetime Podcast. If you want to check out more, click right over here. The video's right over here. Check it out. Check it out. Check it out.